39 years ago today, the Philippines was shaken by the largest funeral in its history. Millions of Filipinos took to the streets on August 31, 1983, to accompany the assassinated opposition leader Ninoy Aquino to his final resting place. The funeral procession drew, according to the New York Times, 1 million people. According to the Associated Press, 2 million people. And according to the legendary journalist Joe Burgos, 7 million people. The streets were so crowded that it took the funeral procession some 11 hours from Santo Domingo Church on Quezon Boulevard in Quezon City to reach the Manila Memorial Park in Parañaque. With his memory and legacy now under attack from emboldened Marcos supporters, it is important to recall and remember that historic hero's funeral. Good evening. I'm John Nery, and you are in the public square. Ninoy Aquino's funeral was one of the largest in world history. There were already some hints in the 10 days between his assassination and his burial that masses of mourners will turn out on August 31. From August 22, an unending line of Filipinos queued up for hours outside his home on Times Street in Quezon City to view his remains and pay their respects. On August 25, his remains were transferred to Santo Domingo Church a few kilometers away, and hundreds of thousands of people took part in the transfer. Still, the scale of the turnout for his funeral was truly extraordinary. I'm delighted to introduce our guests tonight. They are old friends, and they witnessed Ninoy's funeral. Veteran journalist Mike Suarez was an editor of the Associated Press then. He covered that massive demonstration of collective grief. And University Administrator Rene San Andres was a member of the Partido Democrático Filipino and then a Jesuit novice at that time. He took part in the funeral, helping carry one pole of that giant streamer that read, "Hindi ka nag-iisa." Good evening, Mike and Rene. Thank you for joining us today in the public square.
Good evening.
Before I ask the first question, let me just say that I invited many other witnesses, including 7 women. Unfortunately, they could not join us tonight because they were either traveling or had previous engagements or were unfortunately under the weather. Mike, my first question, did you know it was going to be that big? I'm sorry, Mike is muted. There you go.
How about that? Is that fine?
Yes.
Yes.
So you asked if I was surprised. Of course I was. There were, as you cited earlier, there were hints in the previous days about the crowds. But I don't think anybody, least of all the perpetrators of the crime, knew what they had showed. So I guess everybody was surprised.
Rene, why did you turn out in such numbers?
I can only think of Filipinos. We love drama, I suppose. But I suppose most Filipinos probably felt that we are always just taken for a ride by politicians. But when somebody is for us, it stumps us and we believe this must be genuine. I think that was part of it. We respect somebody more because somebody died for us. Unfortunately, that somebody's dead already. But I think it's that the credibility of a person giving up his life for us.
Rene, was it a matter of curiosity? Were people, just curious to find out who Ninoy Aquino was and what the fuss was about, or they were really one with him, mourning his death?
I think a good part of the crowds of the people probably were just curious, but I'd like to believe that underneath it, because I was trying to feel it also, there was this frustration that was deep inside, and seeing somebody make a stand like that, you just can't help but believe this must be somebody. If I don't know this person, at least, well, the curiosity will bring me here. But there's something about the person, and I think it's partly curiosity, but I think it's the respect also for somebody who's given up his life.
I do remember that after his assassination, there were so many bootleg copies, cassette tapes being played on boom boxes in street corners. People started to listen to him again. Uh,
Mhm.
Hearing him maybe for the first time, his rapid fire speech. Mike, what were you doing that day? Where were you assigned? What were you doing?
Oh God. You must remember that up to that point, most of us at the Associated Press had been sleepless since the 21st.
Mm-hmm.
And there were just a few of us. Of course, if I recall correctly, we had a few reinforcements from Bangkok and Hong
Mm-hmm.
Kong, but uh, I can only recall that I was at Santo Domingo probably as early as 6 or 7 in the morning. You
Mm-hmm.
had to be there early to catch the big names, the politicians, and anybody else worth interviewing. And of course, you had to find a good place. If you came later,
Mm-hmm.
well, as everybody found out eventually, the crunch of the crowd was just so large. And I stayed there right up to the very end. So from the beginning of the mass
Mm-hmm.
to after Ninoy's coffin was slid into his tomb,
Mm-hmm.
which happened quite late at night. All in all, I counted more than just 12 hours. People say the march took 10 hours, but
Mm-hmm.
probably, I don't know, I'm probably confused now since I started counting from 7.
Mm-hmm.
The mass began at 8 and must
That's
have
right.
ended after an hour. So the procession must have gotten along around 9 or 9:30. All I
9:15.
noticed was as the day wore on, the procession moved slower and slower and slower until
Mm-hmm.
it was literally moving by the inch. Proof of that is that at several points during the march, I had to go out, look for a phone, and then
Mm-hmm.
phone in some details to get back, only to find out the march had moved only a few inches. That's how thick the crowds were. I don't know about estimates. By late evening, if Manila then had 15 million, I felt all 15 million were out on the streets. I don't know how people make estimates of crowds
Mm-hmm.
in the millions.
Mm-hmm.
They are all guesses. So you have estimates from the ridiculous Marcos crowd of a few thousand
Mm-hmm.
to the AP's own 2 million. I guess it was a lot more than just that. It seemed like all of Manila was out.
Yeah, as a part of that generation, I mean, I have some experience with the large crowds that were gathered at the time, all the way to EDSA. I think this was the most dense um gathering of people. I mean, there were parts on Quezon Boulevard, Quezon Avenue, street leading to um, Luneta. It was just unbelievably packed.
Yeah.
Rene, did you go alone, or did you go with a group?
Well, I was supposed to have been with the PDP-Laban.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I was carrying that one pole of that Nino Hindi ka nag-iisa streamer that had PDP-Laban there. And
Mm-hmm.
we were actually at the head of the procession. It came out, Mike, at 9:15. We were waiting outside at the corner of the street, right outside the church. The coffin, they brought it out at 9:15, and we started moving. And as you said, we reached Quiapo around past noon, and Liwasan approaching Luneta almost 2 p.m. Um, very slow, and you can say that the people were lining the streets. They were not all moving with the procession. So I
you
may have been with PDP-Laban at the beginning, but later it was just the people.
That's right. Yeah. Can you describe, Rene and Mike? Can you describe the mood of the crowd from the start in Santo Domingo and then moving on?
You know, for such a large crowd, what struck me most was it was largely silent. If any talking was done at the start of the march,
Mhm.
it was people were praying, mostly the
Yes.
rosary.
Mhm.
Uh, as I read earlier today, I read other stories. I read something about chants, but I don't really recall the chanting.
Mhm.
It was, I guess, it was a mixture of solemnity
Mhm.
and anger. People were there not just for curiosity, but people went out to tell Marcos, I'm not afraid of you anymore.
Mhm.
I think that was what Ninoy's funeral taught me. People were there.
Mhm.
I read an article by Raisa Robles. I don't know if it was last night or
Mhm.
this morning, where she said, or where the article anyway said that Ninoy's funeral was the time Filipinos showed they were no longer afraid. I think that
Yes.
was true.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
That's
that's true.
My,
Rene,
my own experience, yeah.
yes, please.
My own experience, John, what I remember very clearly was I was in the opposition already. But
Mhm.
during the time before Ninoy's death, if you have to be in the opposition, you had to be a good part of that will have to be underground because it was dangerous to oppose Marcos.
Mhm.
But being in the opposition was very lonely. Eventually, I joined PDP. This was in Davao. It wasn't even PDP-Laban yet, but it was also a small group. But being in the opposition then was a lonely experience. But this one, suddenly you felt, yes, perhaps there was the anger, there was also the inspiration, and there was the finally people awakened. People had courage. That's what
Mhm.
I saw. People finally found the courage to make a stand and make it public and not to cower in fear anymore. So I found it very hopeful.
Did you, both of you, did you see the Laban sign being flashed? Laban being the party that Ninoy Aquino formed for the 1978 IBP elections. Do you recall?
I I really don't recall reading such signs.
Mhm.
Probably what I saw most of were signs saying justice for Ninoy, justice for all.
Yes, Jaja.
Justice for
Justice
Aquino.
for Aquino. Justice
Justice
Or
for
for
hindi
all.
ka nag-iisa. Hindi ka nag-iisa.
Hindi ka
That's
nag-iisa.
right.
Yeah.
But really, I don't think there were any political slogans being
Yeah.
chanted or anything of that sort.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier, it was the silence that struck me most.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a crowd as large as that, not yelling, Oy,
Yes.
upo,
Yes.
upo. Wala, there was nothing of that sort.
It
That's right.
was like an atmosphere of respect. One of the things I was wearing that yellow, one of the very first yellow, hindi ka nag-iisa shirts with the silhouette of Ninoy. And one thing
Mhm.
that caught my attention was people were taking pictures of it, like they were expressing themselves as well. Like I feel that I'm with Ninoy. So it was like a solemn respect for the person. Later, it became a very popular symbol that Nino hindi ka nag-iisa. But
These are
people just saw it, saw the symbol, and just started taking pictures of it, like it was expressing them what they were feeling inside as well.
Where did your yellow
We
shirt
are
come
with
from?
you. Well, it was from PDP-Laban.
Mhm.
It was distributed right before the procession started. Just a handful
Mhm.
of us, maybe 15 shirts. Uh, I had my yellow camisa chino, which I wore to the funeral mass a day or two before.
Mike, if I may ask, so you filed several dispatches throughout the day. I'm assuming that at the start, you had like a curtain raiser, you described the scene, and then you also had like the U.S. ambassador Armacos showed up at the mass, etc. What did you write about in those 12
Well,
hours that you were working?
for something like this, I really did not have time to do any writing at all. Everything I did was dictate, call the office, phone details, any quotes, interviews I
Mm,
had.
I
We
see.
had, as a, in the wire services, you don't always write the story or dictate the story. All you do is call in some facts, the important ones, the proper context, and in the absence of cell phones in those days,
Hmm.
you would understand why one had to rush, look for a phone. Payphones weren't all that common along the route.
That's right.
So one had to be brave enough to knock on doors, go to stores, identify yourself, say, hey, I'm a newsman, I'm covering this. Can I use your phone? That was very hard because at that time, most of the stores were closed too. So really, I did not get to write the story until probably late that night
Hmm.
to do the night lead or what we call the summaries and everything. But really, during the course of the funeral, all I did was dictate on the phone details, interviews, quotes, etc., and describe scenes.
Rene, can you describe your experience? So you have carried hindi ka nag-iisa streamer, which is huge, which features in almost
Yes.
all stories about the funeral procession. Did you go all the way to Parañaque or?
Actually, at some point, I saw Father Robert Reyes, who's an old friend from Ateneo. He was a seminarian when I first met him. He was already a
Mhm.
young priest then. We disengaged from the march actually around 5 o'clock because he had mass at the UP chapel. So we took the bus. At that time, 30, 20 minutes, you could reach UP already from EDSA. But it was 9:15 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon, and we barely reached Parañaque. We were just at South Superhighway EDSA. So,
Mhm.
but perhaps one thing, or can I share this thing about the connection between this and eventually the people power?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it
sure,
came from
please.
a um, it rained around noontime. We were in the Quiapo area, and when we reached Liwasan, which was probably an hour or two after, or approaching Luneta, there was this cigarette vendor with selling store candies also, and he started when he saw us. We were very tired and very and drenched and hungry. He started giving away his candies to us, to everyone. It was much later when I realized that was the real spirit of EDSA, which manifested itself at the funeral of Ninoy.
Mhm.
People who came out, people who made acts of sacrifice. I realized that guy probably had a family to feed, and his family was depending on him, banking on him to take home, to bring home some food. But he gave away everything. He had no kita that day. He gave it to us. And I realized this is what people power is all about. This is what citizenship is all about. It's rising above yourself. And I saw that during the funeral of Ninoy, how somebody's death can inspire people to actually give themselves for the greater good. For me, it hit me much way after that experience. Took me a while
Mhm.
before I realized, hey, this was real citizenship inspired by somebody's death. And for me, that's the meaning of that thing that I carried with me for decades.
That's fascinating. Um, did you see any signs of potential violence during the procession?
Um, I I don't think so. I don't remember any. If ever there was any, I think people would have easily stopped whoever that was. You would always have individuals trying to catch people's attention, but everybody would police those people. So there was real none. I don't remember any.
Mike, how about you? Did you?
Neither. Uh, One factor may have been the fact that throughout the whole day, I didn't see a single policeman nor any
Yes.
riot happening.
Yes.
Absolutely. They must have deliberately stayed away. Either they were afraid or they knew they couldn't fight such large crowds. But no, no, no. I didn't see any sign of
Mhm.
potential violence. In fact, I was shocked this afternoon reading an old New York Times account that after I don't know what time of day it happened
Mhm.
uh, at Malacanang, the story said that there were crowds of people that threw rocks and all, and there was some clashes. And then it went on to quote the Associated Press as saying that one fellow had been shot dead. But
Mhm.
I don't even remember that. No, I
Mhm.
did not see any sign of potential violence.
It must have been another reporter, right? Or maybe you had a stringer.
Pardon me?
It must have been another reporter or a stringer who reported that fact that a person had died later
Oh,
at night.
probably. Yeah, most
Yeah.
likely.
Mhm.
Or I may have just forgotten it.
Uh, two,
But
two of the two of the people invited to join us tonight who could not make it were are distinguished photographers, no? The uh, veteran photojournalists Bullet Marquez of Associated Press and Ernie Sarmiento. But they gave us permission to share their photos. So I have 6 photos to flash. Let's look at all 6 of them, and then I'll ask you, what do these photos say to you? No? Do they jog a certain memory? Do they confirm an impression that you had, or does it startle you? Let's take a look at the 6 photos. One is by Ernie
yeah,
Sarmiento.
that's our photo.
That's the PDP-Laban banner. Ninoy, hindi ka nag-iisa.
Yes.
This is also by Ernie Sarmiento. Uh, this is near Santo Domingo Church. In fact, it was quite a common sight. There were people on the rooftops and so on looking at the procession.
I noticed that too along the route. People were on the
Mhm.
rooftops.
Yes.
Right. This one is also by Ernie Sarmiento. Yeah.
In
So
fact,
the
I see.
coffin was placed on top of this flatbed uh, because otherwise it would have been submerged, no, under millions of people. Um, Here, because of the rains, they put a plastic cover. Can I ask you? One of my distinct memories of this funeral procession is that at a certain point, some wag put a placard on in front of the truck, attached a sign to the truck, and the sign read, "Project of the First Lady, do not delay." Did you see that also?
I kind of
I,
remember that funny side. Uh,
I,
but I never saw it, just in the pictures.
I did not see that, John, but I wouldn't be surprised while while Ninoy was being, while being entombed,
Mhm.
somebody from a rooftop played Dahil Sa'yo. Again, that tune was identified with Imelda.
That's right.
So, parang, hey, yan, that's your
Yes, that's
right.
classic Filipino humor.
Yeah, if you remember that sign, struck fear in
Filipino
the ordinary
satire.
citizen, right? Imelda had, as some cultural critics said, no, an edifice complex. Was always erecting buildings here and there, and her projects enjoyed a special dispensation. No, they were always rushed.
Yes.
So the project tracks would carry this sign: "Project of the First Lady, do not delay." So I think that sign which I saw, but I'm looking for pictures. I can't find pictures now, no? But I swear I saw that. I think it was some critics saying, alleging that Imelda had a hand in the assassination. That was the way I interpreted it. We have three more photos this time from Bullet Marquez. Let's take a look at them also. So this one he's been sharing on his Instagram account. This gives us a better view of the large crowds that went out.
Yeah.
That's Rojas Boulevard, I think.
And the streamer behind that, those of the other martyrs.
Oh yeah, that's another famous streamer. And then the next one, again, so you had many buildings like this. There were people who could not join, go down to the street level. So they just went to the side of their building.
Incidentally, John,
Yes.
the AP office was in that building on the second floor.
Oh.
Where is this?
That's Rojas Boulevard.
On Rojas. On Rojas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Philippine Airlines with its old logo.
Yeah.
I
was trying to reach Bullet just to get confirmation because I couldn't remember what time Ninoy's coffin was at the Luneta, because I had the impression that it left the Luneta by mid-afternoon or pretty much later than that.
Yeah, probably mid-afternoon.
Can we take a look at the last photo, please?
The procession was at made.
So this is the streamer that Rene helped carry. It appears in of the photos. Here it's more spread out. I do remember, Rene, that you were at the start. This was the first streamer.
Yeah, we were actually the head of the procession when we left Santo Domingo. And the coffin was only maybe 30, 50 meters away from us when we started.
Yeah.
And then later, when I look back, it was nowhere because it was just a sea of people between us and the. So here you cannot see the truck anymore.
Can we take a look at the first photo again? All right. I just wanted to point out. So I just found out. I got this photo from Ernie Sarmiento just today, and it turns out that I'm in that picture, and so is Rene.
Yes.
He's in the lower right corner. He's wearing a yellow shirt.
The guy in yellow. With the black morning band.
Left pole of the streamer, and the guy in blue behind him.
That's John.
That's me.
Yes.
I was wearing a mustache at the time. I was in college. And then later on, I took turns carrying that pole.
Yes.
But I left after we reached Luneta because I was soaked. I was shivering. I couldn't stop shivering. So I had to leave. Do you remember what the headline of the Times Journal was the next day?
Yeah. It was about the man who was hit by lightning, and there was no mention of why the man was in the tree in the first place.
Right. That's right. A man died in Luneta while
hit by lightning.
The funeral procession because he was hit by lightning. I actually saw the tree. I saw damage to
Yeah.
the and the next day, the Times Journal's headline was "Lightning Kills One." This was after, this was after the largest funeral in our history, which goes to show, just how much control the Marcoses had over the so-called crony
Yeah.
press.
That was fake news during the time.
That's right. It's a good thing that the Associated Press, had troops on the ground. They were able to tell stories. The New York Times, the BBC, they were all here. And of course, so-called mosquito press, right? We Forum,
Yes.
Malaya,
Mahayagang Malaya.
Veritas, Mr. and Miss, and so on. They did that part of informing the crowd. Can I ask you, having taken a look at these 6 photos, what do these photos say to you today?
Well, for me, I go back to what I said earlier. Being an activist was a very lonely thing. And I actually thought that the Filipino was a coward at the time. Then this thing happened, and I realized, no, it's in us. Heroism is in us. It's just that we are a little too dramatic and we wait for somebody to die. But the hero is in us. I saw it in the faces of people that we passed that day. The lakas ng loob is there. It just needs a mitsa, needs something to ignite it. I saw it again when Cory died much later. And you see ordinary citizens coming out and making a stand, making us, which I never saw in the dark times before Ninoy died. People were just like afraid, refused to speak up. But this one really filled me with hope. And since that time, I've always believed it's in us. Heroism is in us.
Mike, what about you? Whether as journalist or citizen, what are these photos saying to you?
Well, really, seeing these photos brings back memories of the actual crowds that I saw,
Mm-hmm.
and gives you goosebumps.
Yeah.
But really, to me, that was a day when Filipinos finally stood up in numbers to
Mm-hmm.
Marcos. That to me was the significance of the day. Filipinos finally standing up to Marcos and say, "Hey, we're not afraid of you."
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. And that's on top of the fact that there were no trolls during those days. Everybody just relied on word of mouth and radio and some newspapers.
I don't know what the difference it would be if the funeral were today with smartphones and all of the things. And
Yeah,
Yeah.
in a way, the turnout first for the wake, no, when hundreds of thousands lined up, and then for the funeral, I think in a way it was a collective act of discovery. People were realizing that there were other people who felt the same way about the situation in the Philippines. I think that really the assassination pushed people to realize uh,
Yes. Mhm.
we're all living in fear. But I think that more and more people now are willing to say that. I think that was sort of the dynamic.
Yeah.
Precisely, I think because of the controlled press, people had to go and see for themselves. Um, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Ninoy's body was the most viewed remains in our history because people really made an effort to line out
Yes.
outside and then in Santo Domingo. I mean, they wanted to see for themselves. And Doña Aurora, the mother of Ninoy, made the fateful decision not to embalm him, not to
To clean.
change,
Yeah.
right? So you could see the dirt, the bruises on his face, the blood.
The blood.
Yeah. So when you go, you saw him as he was picked up off the tarmac.
I
Yeah. That's
remember
why I think.
Cory,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Ren first.
Yeah, I think one very apt expression then was, if you remember, tama na, sobra na, palitan na.
Mhm.
I think the Filipino response when it's garapalan. And I think the assassination was the garapalan moment of that
Mhm.
happened, and it awakened a lot of Filipinos. Filipinos respond to that when it's garapalan, and they rise up. We can be pliant as the bamboo, but when it's garapalan, we make a stand.
Mike, you're about to say something?
Yeah, I remember, and I got this on authority that Cory really wasn't very happy about the decision of Doña Aurora
Mm-hmm.
because she just couldn't bear to see her husband
Mm-hmm.
that way.
Mm-hmm.
Doña Aurora, on the other hand, reasoned that I want the world to see how they killed him.
Yeah, what they did to his
How they did that to my
Really
son.
had him lie in the state, drenched in his own blood. The his bush jacket coated in blood and all of that. His face dirty with uh, bits of stone from the tarmac. You know. And
Mhm.
I had it on good authority that when Cory saw Ninoy's body for the first time, it was a great shock for her. Which is why on the night before the funeral, that the church was shut and morticians came over. I think it was the same mortician that did Marcos later on to finally dress Ninoy up. And unfortunately, nobody ever saw him again. So the last picture people have of Ninoy in his casket was,
Mhm.
his blackened face and stained bush jacket.
Well, that. There's an idea for a movie, Mortician who worked on both Ninoy and Marcos. Rene, were you able to attend the funeral mass, which was officiated by Cardinal?
I'm not sure. I attended one mass. I was with the choir. I was playing. This was the one sponsored by the Jesuits,
Mhm.
but I'm not sure if it was
No,
Cardinal Sins.
the mass on August 31.
Oh no, no, I was outside. You mean the one inside the church? No, we were waiting outside the church for the funeral.
The reason I ask is,
Um,
so Mike, you're inside, right? You're inside Santo Domingo Church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So as it happens, when Cory spoke at the end of the mass, that was her first public speech. That was
yes.
her coming out speech. When she arrived, she from the airport went 2 times. But this was when she addressed the uh, Filipino people, and that's when we first heard her pronunciation of Ninoy. It's quite
Ninoy.
different. Ninoy, the way we said it. It was her coming out speech. Rene, I was struck by your mention earlier of Cory Aquino's own funeral. No? So that's the closest experience we have to a massive funeral. In 2009, I think the estimates are something like 500,000 people went out to accompany Cory to her grave. I think we can
Although it,
multiply it 10 times at least
yeah,
to get an
actually
idea
it felt
of,
almost the same.
yeah, when you were right there, no? But it didn't take us
Yeah,
long. The crowds weren't as dense. I mean, it was large, it was massive. Uh, but you multiply that by 8, 9, 10 times to get an idea of what it was like in 1982. It was really
yeah,
extraordinary. No? When it was happening, people couldn't believe that they were part of this large historic event.
Again,
yeah.
I wasn't there when
Mhm.
for Cory's funeral. I watched it on TV, and the crowds were still really amazing. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't believe the number 500,000 is an accurate one. I think the numbers were in the millions.
Okay.
Again, when you're talking of crowds in the millions, who's to say how different 1 million is from 2 million, from 3 million? God, there's no way you can tell that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well, I was
but
there, and it felt like it was close to Ninoy's numbers. Although one sharp contrast for me was the moments before the procession of Cory's, because I thought there were very few people, and I thought it was lonely. That's why I was very surprised when people turned out for, and it was that's why I felt it was close to Ninoy's again, because
Mhm.
people just came out again to pay their last respects.
Mike, Rene, there are attempts to first deny that this massive funeral even happened, and then if that cannot be denied, to degrade the Ninoy's character. No? Of course, it's part of this entire script. There are emboldened characters. I ask you for your thoughts on this. Can something as massive as this actually be denied?
I don't think so.
No way.
Propagandists can do it, but what I saw there was the spontaneous stand made by people. You cannot deny it. People made a
Mhm.
stand. It was not something forced on them. That was what I saw. It was like for the Cory's funeral, I was walking with an old woman who came from Cainta, and I was talking to her. We were already in Parañaque, um, Parañaque. No, no, after Mantrade, and
Mhm.
she walked the entire length. And she said, I was asking her, why did you come here? I wanted to show my respect for this woman. That was what this old, probably 70 years old. And she walked the entire length. It was something very spontaneous, something very genuine. You cannot fake that. And I think that was common of many of those people turned out.
Mike, how can we push back against disinformation about the funeral?
Pardon me?
How can we push back against attempts to spread lies about the funeral and about Ninoy?
Oh, one only has to show those pictures. And but really, has anybody tried to deny that such a funeral took place? That would be the most stupid thing.
With all the
Ludicrous.
pictures and videos.
Yeah. And for crying out loud, people in the millions saw that funeral, attended that funeral, were part of that funeral.
And told stories of that funeral.
You know, I don't think that there's any denying that. Not made in Malacanang. You know?
Well, there
We have
is
to
a
tell
second
stories.
movie. There is a second movie. I think the title is Martyr or Murderer, and you can
Oh,
already guess no? that it's about a second assassination of Ninoy Aquino. Rene, may I ask, were you at the airport August 21?
No, I was in Ateneo actually. We were having a meeting, but we when we heard about it, we also felt very sad. But frankly, I thought Ninoy was another politician, so I was
Mhm.
not really a fan at that stage. But when
Mhm.
the man gave up his life, you just had to respect the man. I had doubts about him um, before he got shot at the tarmac. But after that, you just show your respect to the person. It's so different from listening to a politician talk. So there's this
Mhm.
sharp contrast. A person who gives up his life, gives his life for the country. Something hits you, something tells you, hey, I have to respect this guy. This is not a murderer. This is a martyr.
I
And that
remember.
day, I remember. Yeah, I
Go ahead.
remember that day. I thought people were still scared, and then I was with friends, my barkada there from the university belt. We went to
Mhm.
Quiapo, and then on our way home, 7 in the evening, I started noticing people were out in the streets burning tires. making their first statements against the dictatorship. That was something I never saw that before. People just started coming out. This was the evening of
Right.
August 21. I've never seen that phenomenon before.
And of
Different
course,
street
during that
corners,
time,
intersections.
And Rene, all the way up to the next evening, we did not hear anything from Marcos because, as you told us, he was
Yes.
right. He was operated.
Yes.
So for 24 hours, people were wondering, where is the president? You have this massive event, and he was nowhere to be seen. I guess that also helped embolden people,
Yeah,
brought them out to the streets.
possibly.
I know that you've written on this already. You were not at the airport.
No, I was.
You were in the bureau, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was that time. I was writing the stories.
you were writing the stories, and
Yeah.
other people were phoning in the facts.
Other people were phoning in. Yeah, that's right.
We're running long. This we can actually go on for longer, but maybe I can just ask Mike, when you work. So, can you give us an idea as a wire editor and reporter? What was the world looking for when they were reading stories about the funeral?
When they were reading what again?
When they were reading stories about the funeral, no? I mean, what was your sense? No? What was the world looking for?
Well, I all I can say is that up to that point, the only interest Americans had in the Philippines was the U.S. bases
Mhm.
and zilch, nothing else until the Aquino assassination. Then there was something about the assassination that made the world take a second look at the Philippines and Americans to take a second look at the Philippines other than hey, we have soldiers based in that country. But before that, all they cared was for the US bases. Really. Even the Associated Press,
Mhm.
uh, UPI had a different view. The Associated Press never even thought it wise enough to have somebody accompany Ninoy on his trip home.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Best they could do was send Mike Suarez to Tokyo a month before because that was when he planned to come
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
via Tokyo, so I could interview him there and whatever.
Mhm.
UPI and the others, on the other hand, flew with Ninoy on the plane, which is why I felt sorry for UPI because they did beat us by hours on the death of Aquino, but American newspapers and radio stations wouldn't go with the UPI story simply because the Associated Press hadn't confirmed it.
Mhm.
And by that time, Ninoy was already long dead. Of course, I have to take the word of Luis Abuena, who said Ninoy was alive,
Mhm.
and so
The airport got announced.
incorporated that in the copy, and the lead changed and said that there was no confirmation yet that he was dead, but he was long dead. So
Yeah.
uh, from then on, I think it was more the EDSA people power revolt that made the world take notice really. Because in the end, assassinations are stories that happen every day in the third world.
Mhm.
So what was Ninoy? Just another assassination. But here you have a largely peaceful uprising that topples a 20-year dictatorship, and wow, the world simply has to take notice. And
Yeah.
all that was triggered by the assassination of one man.
Rene, my last question for you. Um, there is no specific law that declares Rizal is our hero. There are peripheral
Sorry, sorry.
laws,
Can
no?
you say that again, please?
Uh, there is no specific law
I'm
that
sorry.
declares. There is no specific law that declares Rizal.
No specific.
Law.
I'm sorry. It's getting choppy. No specific.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask about Ninoy's funeral. Uh, did you was that a way for the people to acclaim him as a hero? The fact that millions of people turned out for his funeral, was that an acknowledgement of his heroism?
Could be one way of looking at it. But for me, I think the more significant one is the Filipinos discovering the hero in them. Because before that, I really felt that most people were just scared. But Ninoy's, if you could consider him as a hero for being an example, maybe yes. But I think the more significant thing is that his example awakened everyone to make a stand. I think that's a more significant thing for me of his death. Without that, we would not have reached people power EDSA 86, because there was a stark contrast between the Filipino before Ninoy died and the Filipino of EDSA 86. This was a braver nation. It had to take the death of a person. Well, if that is the meaning of being a hero, you inspire people to abandon their cowardice. Then I
Mhm.
guess you can say that yes, he was a hero.
To Mike Suarez and Rene San Andres, thank you for sharing your time, your memories of, and your
Thank
reflections
you.
on the largest funeral in our history. Your work in journalism and the university helps define and expand the public square. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for the picture. First time for me to see that. Thank you.
The fact that the funeral happened, that millions turned out, that it ran over 11 hours, that's all on record. That's part of history. Marcos supporters who cannot deny that it happened are trying another tack to demean Ninoy's character. But 7 years in prison and 3 years in exile changed Ninoy Aquino completely and prepared him to be a martyr. And the Filipino people saw that. That's why they gave him a hero's burial. That's it for us tonight. The next step for engaged citizens is always to take a more active part in rebuilding our democracy. See you in the public square. This is John Nery. Thank you and good night.